like I have very vivid like flashbulb memories of those moments underwater. And other places I've been, like that are incredible, amazing places. I don't quite have those like flashbulb like. Ah.
Well, first off, what's your name?
Christina Sours.
Okay. And do you have a position or title that you have, like a job or?
I do a lot of things, so I don't have like a single identifier, I guess.
Okay.
Can't put you in a box.
But you're,
Can't put me in a
you're
box.
a freediver.
Yes, freediver, freedive instructor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's start way back at the beginning. Let's where are you from? What was growing up for you like? What did you do?
Yeah. I'm from the Bay Area originally, so just south of San Francisco. So I grew up small town, San Carlos, city of good living. It's the town motto that everyone is obsessed with, so you can't say San Carlos without saying the city of good living. Okay. And my family, so my dad's side of the family was from Carmel, so he grew up there, so we were there like every other weekend growing up, so that's like very seaside beach town. So while I wasn't directly on the beach in San Carlos, it's always been like kind of part of my life growing up, so my parents were very not surprised when I started freediving. But yeah, I mean, I had a really good childhood, I would say. I was driving here and there was like 2 kids just like naked in their front yard throwing water balloons, and I feel like that's kind of what my childhood was like as well. So yeah, and I've been really loving the water since I was really little. I was kind of on swim team when I was young. Then I wanted to be on the dive team, you know, like off platforms and stuff. So they made me still be on swim team if I wanted to be on the dive team. So it was like always kind of like a contentious relationship with pool diving. Yeah. But I was like in the water from very young. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So it was like started out in the pool. Did you spend much time in the ocean growing up, or?
Yeah, I mean, anytime we'd go down to Carmel, we'd, you know, as ungrateful children do, complain that there's nothing to do but go to the beach. So, but we'd be in the beach and in the water. Obviously, it's cold. It's a little colder than here even. Yeah. But yeah, we'd jump in, not necessarily like surfing or anything like that, but just like body surfing, boogie boarding. Okay. That was a big thing. Okay. And my mom, I grew up with my mom telling all these crazy stories about places she'd gone scuba diving. So I got scuba certified pretty young. I think I was like 14, actually here in San Diego. Oh, nice. And I like begged her to let me get certified as soon as I was old enough for Patty to certify you. Yeah, okay. So that was like a big part of my life then, like kind of as a teenager. Was kind of living up to her story. She had wild stories. Like she was an adrenaline junkie. Her scuba stories are always involved like grabbing a poisonous water snake or like a shark circling her while there's like an octopus on her head, you know, stuff like that. So wow. I was not living up to those, but kind of like really inspired me to like want to get in the water and explore and be underwater and things like that.
Okay.
So.
Do you have any of those?
I don't have any of those like crazy stories from scuba diving, which I feel like is maybe a good thing. Probably. But I mean, I've seen some cool stuff underwater, and you know, I love sharks and seen a couple tiger sharks. And I went out to Socorro a few years ago, and I've been on a few like scuba trips with my mom, which has been really cool. Like as an adult, being able to kind of like take her on trips or have her come with me and kind of have that be kind of a bit of a throwback to what stories she would have, like, let's go together. Yeah. But we keep it mild. Yeah.
What's so where did you do your scuba in like La Jolla, or where did you do the scuba open water?
Yeah, I think we were in La Jolla. It was a while ago now. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was like open water, so it was pretty sandy. We weren't doing any like kelp diving for the cert itself. Yeah. I remember finding a pair of Ray-Bans on our very first dive, like on a bed of mussels, which I was psyched about. It's a great underwater treasure already.
Yeah, it's a good start.
Yeah.
Starting scuba, like everything you had imagined it to be, because it sounds like you'd heard a lot about it through your mom. So,
yeah.
Like, what was it like first starting?
I mean, I had like begged her for so long to get me scuba certified, so I was like super psyched to like absorb everything. And I did the cert with my brothers as well because we were here on like family vacation. So we all did it, but I obviously was like the driving force to make it happen.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, I loved being underwater as soon as I, got my tank on and took my first breath. So it was awesome. And then from there, it was like I would go any chance that I get. And obviously in Monterey, a little colder, a little more going on, but they have amazing kelp forests there too. So, I'd suit up in my 7 mil and 5 mil hoodie and splash in there. My parents, they live across from a house that like rents out to a lot of the people in the Navy diving program in Monterey. So I'd always go there and have like dive buddies who were in the Navy. They were either instructors in the Navy or like in the training program. So it was a lot of fun to go out with like new buddies and explore different places in Monterey and things like that. So
Cool.
yeah.
And then what age, when was the first time you heard of freediving?
Yeah, so freediving, I didn't really hear about it until later on, I think. So, I mean, you inevitably meet people scuba diving when you're like out on a boat who are freedivers, and they kind of lure you over to the dark side, and they're like, it's super cool, like no tanks, less equipment. So I ended up trying, I got my first cert, I guess it was between 3 and 4 years ago. I did my level 1 up in Northern California in Monterey. And I liked it. Like I was psyched to learn about it, and I'd been like practicing my breath holds in bed like for a month leading up to my course. But I feel like when I did my level 1, I liked it, but I didn't like love it. I didn't like fall in love with freediving right away. I guess I felt like, I mean, there's a lot going on in your level 1. It doesn't always like click just in that moment. And I was like, well, I can probably like stay underwater longer with my tank on anyway, and I kind of am a little calmer, know what's going on. So I was like down to freedive, but I continued down my scuba track. And I went down to Baja, to Cabo, to do my rescue certification for scuba diving. And I made a bunch of friends there who were local and were training for their 8 to 4 freedive level. And they were like, well, like, if you're certified, you've been out training, so like come out with us and we can all train together. And I was like, yeah, sure. I've been on a buoy that like 1 or 2 times in my level 1 course. So I went out with them and I kept going out with them and really fell in love with it then. I think once I started getting deep enough where I was really like free falling and able to let it all go, that was kind of the click for me. I was in the middle of like my super stressful job as well, so I had a lot of like anxiety around that, and I think freediving just helped me like ground and just totally clear out. And I'm not like a meditative person much. My brain is always going like a million miles a minute, and when I was a producer, like that was just the state I was in at all times. So I think like once I got in the water with scuba diving, that happens, but you're kind of excited by everything going on outside your body. And freediving was the first time I was really able to like clear completely out and be like 100% in my body, which was a really neat experience.
Cool.
Yeah.
Why do you think you can do that in freediving?
Yeah, I mean, I freedive almost entirely with my eyes closed, like the whole time, as much as I can at least. So I just feel like that helps block everything out, and you have like very singular things to focus on. And frankly, if you try to focus more than on one thing, it just doesn't work. So having like one thing to really think about, whether that's EQ or your free fall position, it kind of just helps you zone in, and everything outside of yourself just falls away, which is a really cool experience.
Yeah. What was your EQ journey like? Was it pretty easy for you? Did you ever have any like hard points or depths or?
Yeah, my EQ journey, it's been pretty smooth, I would say, since I'd been like, I've been EQing since I was little, just like diving in the pool or like extreme snorkeling, and you just go when you're a kid. And from scuba diving, obviously, I'd had experience with EQ.
Yeah.
I think learning mouthfill was, again, not tricky, but just something to get used to. So Frenzel, I was kind of like doing it without necessarily knowing exactly what I was doing. So when I tried to like properly learn mouthfill, especially for a little bit deeper deaths, then I had to pay attention to like, oh, okay, there's different places your tongue is supposed to be. Like you're not just kind of like going down and not paying attention to anything.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a little bit of a learning curve for me. So I had to get used to that sensation of like, again, these kind of like singular focus things. Once everything else got in a good rhythm, then it was like, okay, now I'm paying attention to where my tongue is, which is a very specific thing.
Yeah. Very much.
Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit about you're a producer, so maybe I'm just curious, like talk a little bit about that. Like how did you get into that and what was that like?
Yeah. I'd had like a couple internships in college in marketing and publishing. I was an English major, so I feel like those are like, you're either like a teacher or like going into marketing or publishing or something like that. So I tried those things, decided they just weren't quite creative enough for me, and I was watching, what movie? I think it was Frozen. I was watching the credits of Frozen, and I was like, there's like people here that aren't like artists. Like you don't have to be like artistically talented to work in film, which I'd always kind of assumed, or in animation in particular. So then I started going down the road of working as a PA. They shoot a lot of horror films in Maine, which is where I went to college. So I like worked on a bunch of horror films in college, which was kind of funny.
Cool.
And then after I graduated, I lucked out and got a job at GoPro in their production department, which was a ton of fun. They ended up at a certain point like letting go of that entire department, which I feel like is pretty common in film. Stuff just kind of disappears all of a sudden. And I applied through like the online portal to ILM, which is the VFX company within Lucasfilm, and ended up getting an interview and got the job. I was working in an R&D department, which I'd never done before. I had like no technology background, but it was kind of like I'm a quick learner and kind of got up to speed really fast. And once I was working at ILM and doing well in that position, then I started branching over more to the production side. So then when things were taking off there in the virtual production world, I moved over and started managing that and getting more experience in that. And as that got bigger and bigger, of course, I had more and more responsibility, which was an amazing experience. But it does take away a lot of your life when you're always stressed out about your job and this one thing. So that can definitely have an impact on you.
Yeah. So then how has that evolved? Like where are you at now? Like how are you getting by?
Yeah. Well, I left ILM 2 years ago. I have been a photographer for a while. So actually while I was working at ILM, I was also growing my wedding photography business and shooting weddings, because that was always on weekends. And for the most part, my film job was during the week. There were some like crazy weeks where I'd like fly back and forth from a shoot to like home to shoot a wedding and then back to LA for something and all that. So that was a little crazy. So I ended up leaving 2 years ago, and I've been fortunate enough to be doing like a little bit of everything I love. So I still get to work in VFX as kind of a part-time consultant. So after I left, people kind of called me like, hey, we need help with this very specific technology. So I still do that a little bit during the week. And then I'm running my wedding photography business as well. So that's started up in full force in our California summers. And I'm a freedive instructor. So I've like been super fortunate to have time to like balance all three things and be able to train personally and run courses and things like that. So I feel like I'm in a very sweet spot, and I'm trying to enjoy and appreciate it as much as I can at the moment. Yeah.
It's quite the juggling act.
Yeah, it is. But I love it.
Yeah, how has it been kind of managing all that with training on top of it?
Yeah, training, the kind of like, I wouldn't say switch, but getting more involved in the competitive freediving world is definitely like, you have to carve out and prioritize things. So for my own personal training, last year I was like teaching as much as I could, and this year I've been teaching way less, because if I have time I basically had to make time to train. So whether that means that I'm traveling somewhere else to train, which I've gotten to do a little bit this year, really carve out, like I had like 2 weeks of solid dedicated training, but even just making sure, like if you're teaching courses, as I'm sure you guys know, it's like super exhausting. So you can't always be teaching and then the very next few days be personally training, because rest is very, very important. And I very much believe that for freediving, for my own freediving and other people's freediving, like making sure your dives are still enjoyable and that you're excited to get in the water. Yeah. Maybe not excited in the morning, maybe like after you have your wetsuit on and all that's done, then you're excited to get in the water. Yeah. But that's like always been very, very important not to like reach that burnout. So that's, I think, the biggest thing that I've had to balance.
Yeah, totally.
So then, yeah, at what point did you decide to become an instructor for freediving, or like, yeah, what?
Yeah. So after I was in Baja, I did my 8 of 4 as well, because I was in the water like every day for probably about 3 weeks straight, maybe a month. So I was able to progress and pick up a lot. And that's an assistant instructor level. So I ended up being sent to Sydney for a film that I was working on there. And while I was in Sydney, I like reached out to all the instructors in the area and was like, I'm an assistant, like I'd love to come help with your courses. So then I had like 6 months where, again, every weekend I was out with like different instructors assisting their courses. And then I realized like I love freediving, but I loved teaching. And when you're assistant instructor, it's kind of cool because you basically on your float, you have a lot of the students who are having trouble with something. So either they can't equalize or they need help on their duck dive, or they're kind of like a little bit nervous and they're not able to get depth or things like that. So I got to kind of practice teaching with some of the more difficult teaching situations that you might have as an instructor, but also like learn from all the different instructors that I was working with. So that was a really cool opportunity. So after like 6 months of doing that, I came back and was like, okay, I think like I want to be a full instructor. I want to kind of run my own thing and run courses because I really loved that teaching aspect of it. So I came back and I did a comp, kind of like as a prelude to my instructor course, because I felt like I should have an experience of what that world is before I become an instructor. So I did a comp, and then I did my instructor cert, and yeah, then started my own thing.
Where'd you do your instructor cert?
I did it with Pranamaya over in Playa del Carmen with Julian Board.
We go down and dive with them every year. So
yeah, they're awesome. And Julian's like an amazing instructor, so I was really glad that I got to learn from him. Learn all the ropes.
Did you get to dive with like Rodrigo and Peter?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah,
they're awesome.
We heart them very much.
Yeah, me too. We all do.
How did that first comp go, and what kind of got you on that?
Yeah. I was super nervous to do the comp, and I was kind of like, well, I don't really care. I just want to get white cards. And I wasn't super like attached to my results on it because I just wanted to do it for the experience. And that's kind of, I feel like, how it went. It's like I announced depths that I felt like were pretty solid for me. But like the feeling of coming up with your white card tag and being able to show it off, like it was super fun. And of course, like the biggest thing is that like everyone you meet at the comp is awesome, and there's so much to learn from everyone there. That comp in particular is really cool because there's such a range of levels. Like I was definitely not the only first timer. There's a bunch of first timers, and people are anywhere from like 25 meters to like the challengers doing 70-meter dives. So there's a lot of people to learn from. My roommate was Monse, who has the Mexican record for women. But she's like this super humble, amazing person. And we were roommates in Julian's house. And I was like chatting with her, like as we both had arrived there in Arturo. Her partner is safety at the comp. And we were like chit-chatting in Spanish, which like I'm not fluent in, but I can have a conversation. She was like, finding out about me. I was like asking about her, like, oh, cool, how long have you been diving? Oh, really neat. And she like started to tell me about her first comp, and like she was like, oh yeah, like I did a dive and I found out like afterwards that it was a national record, ha ha ha. And I was like, wow, what? Did I understand this correctly? Okay, cool. So I was like, that probably won't be the case for me, but that's all right. But it's just people like that, like you meet them and they're so humble, and everyone's willing to like share and teach you something, and that atmosphere is really, really neat to be in. Yeah.
What do you think, like, kind of coming back to like the instructor stuff, and you're talking about equalization and things, like what as an instructor do you see is the most common issue that you see, or like how do you it's always interesting because it's a really tough thing to diagnose and to figure out, and then to get people on the path, you know. So like,
Yeah.
what do you see, and like, what do you do to kind of help people like through that process?
Yeah. I mean, I think EQ is like commonly the biggest issue in like a level 1 course. But there's a lot of things besides necessarily technique that make EQ a lot harder. And a big part of that is like the mental component, like the stress of it. So I have found like out here when we're swimming out and you're wearing a lot of gear and all that, EQ tends to be a bigger issue than other places. The water's also cold out here. And I think a lot of the time when you're tense, you start like clenching all your muscles, and that includes like your face and your neck and your diaphragm. So people who might otherwise be totally fine on land with like a Frenzel EQ have issues when they're out in the water. Some folks, when they're stressed, they just start switching to Valsalva. Or if you're really tense up in your neck, like you have issues where your Frenzel isn't going properly. So I think those are some of the more common issues that I see out here. So, I mean, one thing I really emphasize to students is that like you have to be patient with yourself. Not everything clicks on like the very first dive, like tackle one thing at a time. So if EQ is an issue, like you need to really focus, first of all, of course, technique. You can do that dry, you can practice. Sometimes you just need time to practice, so having that patience. And just having fun being underwater. Like you can still go head first, have a little bit of that CO2 training where you're just doing a dive, because I think if you're enjoying being in the water, regardless of whatever technical issues you're running into, you're going to want to go back. So really it's about like keeping your spirit up and staying motivated to like get back in the water and keep going, because again, it might take a few tries for things like that to really click. Yeah.
Totally.
So you're like pursuing competing like a lot, or you're putting a lot behind that now?
Yeah.
So what kind of led you to that, and what got you hooked on the competition scene?
Yeah. Again, competing isn't something that like I didn't plan on necessarily being a competitive diver, but I had a really good experience. The first comp that I did, we did vertical green up in Redondo Beach last year, which was a big success. And again, a part of like the competition scene is the community behind it.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's really why I started like looking into competing more. And there's a pretty strong contingent of like SoCal freedivers who compete at higher levels. So I was talking to Lance up in Redondo Beach, and I knew a couple of others who were going to go to Worlds this year. So I was chatting to them about it, and I hadn't like necessarily thought about competing at Worlds, to be honest. But I just started chatting with them and like kind of imagining going, which to be honest totally freaked me out. I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. Like, I don't even think my dives are deep enough for that. Yeah. But I decided to kind of go out for the team and put myself out there, mostly because I felt like it was something that kind of scared me a lot and made me nervous, which was a bit of an opportunity to like push myself and put myself out there, which I haven't had in like a while, I think, that really like personal challenge. So that was part of what made me apply for the team. And then of course I like freaked out for a couple months, like, should I have applied? Maybe not. I don't know if I can do this. Like, but I was like, I'm not gonna lie for my numbers. So if they let me on the team, then great. But I think once I found out I made the team, like the excitement of like everyone around me made me less nervous and more excited.
Oh, cool.
And this year I'd planned on kind of switching my focus to my own personal diving anyway. So I'd planned to do like a training trip and a little less teaching in any case. Yeah. So all the pieces kind of aligned. Yeah. So when my training trip came up, I was like, okay, it's not just like Christina futzing around in the water. Like I've got to actually focus and get something done here, which I did. And I had a great time in depth. I'd been around 50 meters for like a couple years at that point and just hadn't had like the opportunity to go train. Yeah. So I was like, I know I can get more depth in me. I just need the chance to do it. Yeah. So again, this was kind of like an excuse to push myself that little bit and and go for that depth and spend the time, spend money to go do it. So that training trip went really well, and I just had a competition in Mexico again where I could kind of like, does this translate? Yeah. That also went great. Like I felt like all my dives felt super strong, like I could go deeper, like felt really good coming up from all of them. So that was super encouraging as well.
How'd you finish in that comp?
I ended up winning overall, which is very unexpected. Yeah. Oops. Yeah. No, it was super,
awesome.
I did not go in planning to do that. I went into the comp like, well, yeah, it'll be extra training days for me on my depths and stuff like that. And so then I got there and did the actual comp training days, and I was like, oh, like I feel pretty good. Like I think I can, drop a low. So
Yeah.
yeah.
What kind of depths were you messing around with?
I did like 64 in training, which again felt super solid. Bifin's had always been my strongest discipline, because learning to free fall without fins on and free immersion was like totally messing me up.
Okay.
But I fixed that. So I got that down. So I was in the 60s free immersion as well. And I wanted to train a bit no fins, so I threw that in there a little. So I'm trying to focus now on no fins in the pool so I can have a little bit more training behind that as well.
Okay. What does your training approach kind of look like? Like, do you have different like sections of time where you focus on different things?
Yeah, I'm not super regimented with my training, but my goal is to do something every day. So it's like a combination of like, I'll try and do a CO2 table maybe every other day, lung stretching maybe every other day, and then in terms of like physical fitness, I've been doing hot yoga, which is actually super helpful and really hard. So probably like twice a week doing yoga, and then I've been getting my partner to take me to the gym, do some like actual big girl training. So that's been kind of new for me. I would go on runs, but sometimes I can like hurt my hip. So I'm trying to stay pretty light on that. But just a little bit of something. I'll go to the pool as well, ideally twice a week. So I'm kind of going to kick that into gear as I approach Worlds. But typically once or twice, doing, again, pretty, nothing like super heavy in the pool, because as with like training in the ocean, I don't want to like be pushing myself every time I go to the pool, because I felt like when I'd done pool training in the past, it'd been like, okay, like PBs, we're going for like whatever. And every time I'd approach to go pool train, I'm like, oh God, I don't want to do this. Yeah, so then I kind of started just like having fun in the pool, doing like 25-meter sprints and stuff like that, which was actually fun, and you could kind of like make it a bit of a game. So that style of pool training is now what I do, because it gets me in the water and excited to go pool train, and it is good training when you're doing repetitive dives like that. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And then, so a lot of CO2 tables, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm not as diligent about doing them every other day right now, but again, I'm trying to ramp up. But I've been doing exhale CO2 tables. Yeah, they're tough, but I'm doing them at like times that aren't super difficult. So again, to make sure I'm like going back to do them. So it really only takes like 10, 15 minutes before bed. So it's not like I'm spending like an hour doing like a CO2 table. So they're pretty quick. I'll do like around 6, and they're less than a minute. So again, it's nothing like super difficult. Doing the smaller repetitive holds has been working out well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like CO2 on an exhale is a special form of torture.
It is quite tricky, but it's funny because I started doing it with an oximeter on my finger, which again kind of gamifies it a little bit, because I can like check the table after, and it's incredible because you can see when your MDR kicks in, which is really cool, and you can totally tell, like in particular on an exhale hold, when that kicks in, because suddenly it's like my first few, I can't even make it to the full like 45 seconds or whatever it is. And then the last 3 are like super easy. And it's just like the switch. And then you can like check your table later and it's like, oh, look at that. Like you can see when it happens. Yeah.
Wow. So there's a way to make that fun.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There are ways. Yeah. I would say like in general with training, like not training well below your maxes is super important if you're trying to do like long-term training, because if you're pushing it like even a little bit, you will burn out and you'll train your brain to be like anxious about training. So it's super important to kind of have fun with it, and it's better to like do it at a low capacity rather than not do it at all. So if I'm like not really feeling like doing one that day, I'll still do it, but I'll do like maybe like 3 holds, and I'm like, that counts.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's solid.
Yeah.
So as you were getting into the sport, I feel like everybody has a moment that kind of hooked them, and it sounded like yours might have been free fall. But one, I'd love to hear about that moment a little bit more, and then as you've continued in the sport, has that moment kind of shifted? Have there been other moments that came up or other reasons that have like continued to like rehook you in the sport?
Yeah. I guess like thinking back to like the hook moment, I don't necessarily remember like a specific second in the water that it was happening, but I remember like as I was out training with my friends who were kind of above my level, I wasn't trying to like match depth to them, but I was kind of like slyly watching techniques they were using.
What are you doing down there?
Yeah, like what's that? Like, so mouth fill was one of them. So my instructor down there at Ocean Tigers, Benoit, he's super awesome, funny dude. But he was super encouraging, and just like as I was seeing my friends do certain things, he's like, oh yeah, try mouth fill, go for it. Just, fill your mouth with air and see what happens. Just smile and equalize. So I would just kind of do that, and I was like trying out mouth fill. And I remember just like sitting there and like smiling like with my mouth fill, which of course technique-wise is to like push the air up and equalize with your cheeks. But to me, I was like, just like smiling and doing my mouth fill. So the free falling with that sensation of just kind of like enjoyment, that was really what did it for me. And the free fall, again, just like letting everything go, not worrying about your kicking or whatever it is, and just kind of like focusing on that smile and just falling, was like super fun and really enjoyable and peaceful and everything. So, yeah. And then I think like along the way, it's kind of, rather than just like letting everything go and just falling, I still like, it's in the free fall. Like I feel like every dive, especially deep dives I have, you're like going down at the start of the dive, you're buoyant and you're swimming down in whatever way you're swimming and yada yada. And I'm always like, just get to free fall. And once I get to free fall, I know like I'm able to like let everything go. Like, okay, my shoulders drop and I just kind of like can sink into it. No pun intended. Yeah. And I think like, again, focusing on those like tongue locks with the mouth fill, that was something I was really working on this year when I went to go train in Dominica. So I hadn't had an issue with mouth fill, like it had taken me to 50 just fine. But again, being like really conscious about how I was managing that air, made it like a little bit of a game. So I did a lot of training with like mouth fill from the surface and like FRCs and seeing how far I could take it, and doing like mouth fill at 5 meters and going like 30, or mouth fill at 5 meters going 40, things like that. That again, kind of like this training, gamifying, that's not just like doing your PB dive. So those are like super fun, and so now like when I am doing a deep dive and I get to that free fall, I have that kind of thing that I'm focusing on. That's usually about how that air management is going. So a good dive, I'm kind of like hitting the bottom, and in that moment I'm like, okay, how much air did I have left? Because I'm like trying to report back to myself when I get to the surface, like, yeah, like I was on T, or like I was on K. Sweet. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And then so 2 things. One, I guess, what do you have lined up for the rest of the year? What are your plans? What are your goals?
Yeah. This year is definitely busy. So I had my first comp of the year in May, and then I'm going to be training up until August when I leave for Roatán. So there's 2 comps there. The big one is the World Championships. So I'm on the U.S. team this year, competing there. And then prior to that, there's the Caribbean Cup. So that's really like a little over a week before that. So that's kind of a comp. I think a lot of the U.S. team is going to do. A lot of folks who are at Worlds, I think, are going to also be competing in that competition. So it's a bit of a warm-up, training days, see how it's going. It always takes a couple days to get back to depth in the water. So that'll be something I need to strategize on those training days, because if you only have a couple before a comp, it's like, okay, there's different disciplines and you got to ease back into that depth. Things like that. So that's kind of what I'm prepping for at the moment.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
You'll be training pretty much here the whole summer?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So cold water.
Cold water, heavyweight, big wetsuit. Yeah. And again, I'm not doing any like crazy depths here. So it's a lot of like FRCs and again, those kind of early mouthfill dives really to get that down, because I feel pretty well like depth adapted at this point and doing lung stretching and things like that. So that doesn't seem to be a limiting factor for me as long as I can continue managing that air. So that's kind of what my focus is when I'm training out here right now, at least.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's not that you don't have access to depth, it's just that you're working more on kind of like air management.
Yeah.
And so you don't need it
Yeah.
as much. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Because my CO2 tolerance, like on my dives, feel pretty good around early mid 60s. So I feel like as long as I'm going to the gym and doing my yoga and whatever this or that, that'll be okay.
Now you have to do an extra CO2 table.
Yeah, right, exactly. No, I think also like sometimes diving deep out here can stress me out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's something I want to work on, but probably not before a big comp. Just because you're wearing a lot of weight, so getting up from the bottom can be a little bit harder. And I don't necessarily want to train myself to like be anticipating that on a deep dive.
Yeah.
So.
That sounds wise.
Yeah, that's my excuse.
Buy it.
Great.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like you've traveled around, you've done a lot of diving like around the world, and yeah, I guess are there any places that stick out to you, like your favorite spots you've been to, or places you really want to go? Or...
Other than Redondo.
Redondo Beach. Yeah. I haven't been to Asia, so I haven't been diving in like even like Indonesia, the Philippines, or this or that. So I'd love to go there. I have been to Fiji again with my mom on a scuba trip, which was absolutely amazing. So that was incredible. I would say my favorite place I've been diving, I was scuba diving, but it was a liveaboard over in Socorro, which is like a full 24-hour boat ride out off of Cabo. And it's this amazing marine protected area, and there's these like pinnacles that come out of the water and these volcanic formations, and there's tons of different sharks and huge schooling fish and really like large animal life. And it's so amazing because you're out in the middle of nowhere. So like all of these animals, they're really just doing their thing. And that's true as well, like on the coast here, but they're like a little more interactive. I don't know what it is. It's really amazing to be out there when there's so much life. And it's pretty big, so you think they would like care or pay attention to you. But it's like, no, you're just like another big animal in the water. So they're all kind of like cruising around. So that trip was really cool. And that was a trip actually when I really started thinking about getting freedive certified. Not necessarily to go there, but I just like met a lot of freedivers on that trip. So I feel like that was like kind of a spot that sticks in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Does this make it harder to dive back home, or is this place special to you? Like, you like diving here?
Do you like it here? No, I mean, I love it out here. The kelp is like, and I always said this even when I was scuba diving or free diving, like I've had both my absolute worst dives of my life here, but also my absolute favorite, best dives out here. I think there's just something super special and magical about a kelp forest where you feel like you're in a frickin' aquarium and like the light beams are coming through the like jungle of kelp and you're kind of like weaving in and out. I mean, you guys know. It's just like incredible, and there's like very few places in the world where you can find that. So I feel like those moments where like the sun is kind of sparkling on the rock and you're going through the kelp, like I have very vivid like flashbulb memories of those moments underwater. And other places I've been, like that are incredible, amazing places. I don't quite have those like flashbulb, like, moments. It's kind of like, oh, that was an awesome trip and I saw so many cool things. But I feel like here is like very near and dear for those moments. Maybe because they're so like, it's all the stars really have to align to get that perfect, like low swell, okay, good biz, oh, the sun's out, like boom, there it is. Yeah.
Doesn't happen super often, but it does happen.
Yeah.
I think it makes it that much more special when it does happen.
Yeah,
That's not
exactly.
just, like, every day.
Exactly. And, the cold water is cold, so you have to suit up extra for it. But then that's that, like you suit up extra and like hopefully you're enjoying it when you're out there. And it's like seasonal as well, right? So it does warm up a little bit in the summer, which is nice. In Monterey, it kind of stays cold, but it's still really special. Yeah. That said, I do free dive a lot more than I scuba dive now, I will say. If I'm somewhere new that has like cool like macro life, like there's nothing like, like sitting down with like an octopus for half an hour underwater, which is really cool. But definitely, I think especially out here, I'm like, man, I don't want to be underwater for half an hour. Like I'd way rather be like kind of moving around. Free diving's like you kind of stay warm, like a little more active, especially when you're out fun diving. So definitely out here, I'm free diving much more than I'm scuba diving nowadays.
Yeah, spend a little more time in the upper thermocline.
Yes, exactly. Maybe a ray of sunshine, like a seal. You could stick your arm out of the water. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm feeling good. You got anything else you want to ask?
Yeah, what would you say either to yourself like 5 years ago or 3 years ago, 4 years ago when you got into this, or to a new student that is just thinking about getting into the sport or taking the class? What would you tell? Yeah, what would you tell earlier, Christina?
Little Christina. I think just enjoy yourself, which is a little bit what I've done all along. But you can definitely like get in your head about certain things and wanting to be at a certain depth or this or that. I feel like especially with new students, like if there's something that's not clicking right away, it's really easy to get in your head about it. But just like enjoying yourself in the water is always going to be like the number one most important thing. So I still like take that with me. And even if I'm like nervous for the comp or when I was kind of freaking out about Worlds, it was like, and before every dive in competition, I'm always like, we'll see. In my head, like, okay, line set, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, we'll see. Just like kind of enjoy it. And I know like, again, there's moments where I'm like, I'm just gonna do my dive until I get to free fall. And then I'm like in the zone. So always in my head, I'm like, as soon as I get to free fall, like I'm already at the bottom basically.
Gotcha.
I don't think that'll always be the case, sure. But that kind of like enjoyment of that experience is really like what I focus on and what I always recommend my students focus on. Like get out there and just enjoy being in the water. Like you don't even have to be underwater, just enjoy being out there. Yeah.
Cool. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes people say that and it's almost like a cop-out answer.
Yeah.
But it's like no, legitimately, you will perform a lot
You
better
will.
if you're enjoying it.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. I feel like I've had students too that like, and early on when you're a free diver, you get like super into it. But you kind of like burn out on your own enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Not that your enthusiasm goes away, but it like kind of takes you too far.
Yeah.
Like, when you're diving like all the time, and then it starts to feel like, okay, I'm dragging myself out into the water.
Yeah.
So it's really like, listen to yourself. Enjoyment isn't like a frivolous feeling. That's actually like chemicals in your body that are telling your brain like, this is good.
Yeah.
And you want to keep that. You want to keep that sensation. So I do think it's like really important for performance and just life to be like making sure you are enjoying yourself out there. And yeah, there's times when like you have to drag yourself out of bed. Honestly, every time before I dive, I have to drag myself out of bed. So I say like, oh, diving, like enjoy it. But like I tell people, I'm like, yeah, I didn't want to go dive this morning.
Yeah.
Like I'm always liable to cancel like the night before, so I'm like, oh, I don't want to get in the water, and then the morning of it's like too late to cancel, so I'm like, okay, like, oh, I don't want to get in the water.
Yeah.
But again, like once you have your wetsuit on, once you're in the water, you should be enjoying yourself.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important.